Hi, and welcome to Oakville Matters. Today we're going to talk about the way we're aging as a society and what we need to do to make sure that we be an age-friendly community and also foster the idea of active living, and let's call it active aging, as we see this kind of social change. And with me today to illuminate these subjects is Jodi, who's the principal of J Consulting Group, and she was the lead consultant on Oakville's age-friendly study. And it's kind of a foundation piece of work that we'll be building policy and programs off of. Mark Venning, who's the founder of Change Rangers, and one of Mark's goals is to adapt our society to meet the needs of a longevity society. I like the concept of longevity. I mean, come on, think about it. Everybody would like to have longevity. Nobody wants to check out, that I know anyway. And Kate Dupuis, who is the head of the Center for Elder Research at Sheridan College. And Mark, why don't we start with, tell us how you came to create Change Rangers. Tell us what you're out to do with it.
Well, it started when I was doing work in the career management, career transition field. So I was doing a lot of work with older adults, 50 plus, January 55. And they were saying things like, I'm too young to retire. Do I want to keep working? In fact, that's a major theme in terms of active aging, is people want to work longer now, typically. And so that's sort of where the nucleus of it all started, and then I started redesigning retirement programs for people, different organizations, and then it grew into this subject around longevity. And what really inspired me was this book called Longevity Revolution by Theodore Roszak. And one of his phrases in the book was, age is often wasted on the old. And it's about time we found some good social use for those extra years. And that's sort of where it all kicked off. It's bigger than about aging, it's about longevity.
Well, there's no question that there's some aging going on, and we have a graphic that will show that if we put that up. The growth in aging is the one that I think we need to show, because it gives you a nice 30-year trend, and there it is. And you can see that, I mean, you've got a pretty substantial change in the number of people in the Halton region who are 65 plus. And this is an illustration of the share of where they're going. And this is actually kind of fun. A lot of people think Oakville is defined by its senior population, and what this shows you is that Burlington, which is more than 10,000 people smaller than Oakville, eclipses us on the senior population side. And it also shows you how incredibly young Milton and Halton Hills must be, on an average basis, well, at any rate, you can see that they don't have the center of gravity of aging is on the lake, I guess is what we'll say. Jodi, can you walk us through what the age-friendly study found?
Sure. So maybe I'll just start by saying that the age-friendly baseline study that was done in Oakville really focuses on the World Health Organization's framework for an age-friendly city, and that began with the Global Global Age-Friendly Cities Project, which was an initiative to make cities around the world more age-friendly. And it looks at a framework from both the environment as well as our social environment, so the physical and the social environment. And it has 8 different elements of an age-friendly city that the baseline study in Oakville also looked at. So it looks at our hard infrastructure, such as transportation, housing, our outdoor spaces, and our buildings. It also looks at our services, so things like community supports and health services, communication, information. And I also think, very importantly, it also looks at how people are engaged in their community. So their civic engagement, employment, also their social inclusion, as well as social participation, which we know are really, really important to the overall health and well-being of people as they age. So some of the things we looked at, it was really twofold. The first piece was to look at what's already going on in the town of Oakville from an age-friendly perspective, and there's a lot going on. So one of the things we found was that there's a number of initiatives that are going on, things like changes to accessibility standards for inside our buildings, but also in outdoor spaces like parks and trails. There's some transportation initiatives going on. There's Free Mondays, transportation for older adults. There's a full range of programs and services aimed at meeting the needs and preferences of older adults across the town. So there's a number of things going on. When we looked at our research and when we talked to stakeholders and residents, some of the things that we found that maybe were needed were for example, one of the things we found was that overall people report a very good or good perception of their health. So that's very good. But when we looked at where some of the challenges were, some of the things that people pointed to were things like feelings of loneliness or feelings of depression or not having meaningful activities to do. So that was one of the key findings that I took from that. We also found that while there are a full range of services, lots of programs out there, not everybody's aware of them, and so not everybody's accessing them. So that's important. I would say also one of the things we heard a lot about was housing. Having a full range of housing options, including affordable housing, so that people are able to age in place, age in Oakville, and not having to move out of the town. And I would just say one of the other things we found, and is, your data points to this also, is that the senior demographic or the older adult demographic is very large, but it's also very diverse. So within the senior population, there's a lot of differences in needs, preferences, abilities. Also within the town, there's a lot of differences in backgrounds and languages and income levels.
Yeah, I've seen some of our diverse communities have, I guess I'll call it spontaneous community support groups for elder citizens. And that's especially, I'm noticing it in populations where the elder generation often don't have very much at all command of English or French. And so their degree of isolation is even greater if it weren't for their group outings where they can speak their native language with each other.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
And I know the Halton Multicultural Council does offer some programs and language programs, and those are helpful, but definitely the newcomer population, there may be less opportunities for them to participate.
Well, I'm not sure it's true, but I go around with the belief that the younger you are, the easier it is to learn a language and vice versa. Kate, how do the needs of the elderly impact the community?
Well, I think some of the issues that Jodi touched upon that came up in the research that you were doing really speak to us at the Center for Elder Research. So things like social inclusion, social isolation, and loneliness, those are coming up more and more. We know that being socially isolated is very bad for our physical health, not only our mental health, but also just physically. Being alone, being socially isolated means you're probably not being as active, right? If you don't have a core group of friends to go out to Tim's with to grab a coffee or to go for a walk down by the lakeshore, you're just going to be at home by yourself. There's sort of the idea of the use it or lose it. If we're at home, we're not being active, we're not getting out there, we're not stimulating our brain, we're not stimulating ourselves physically. That can have real repercussions for our health. We talk about longevity, but from our perspective, it's not so much living longer, it's living well. So you can live till you're 95, but have a whole host of cognitive and physical ailments that impact your quality of life. So for us, it's always looking at how are we aging in a way that we're doing activities that are meaningful and purposeful for us, but also contribute positively to our overall quality of life. It's not enough to just live long, we have to live well.
Yeah, I spoke yesterday with a 90-year-old friend of mine who runs a very large and very successful Oakville business, and he's got 2 generations still working for him in his family business, And he's like, well, I'm not going to quit because when you retire, you die.
Yeah.
So he's, I think, and he's very vital. I think his dedication to activity sort of proves your point. So I know that the active part, we find that actually that participation level that you're talking about is true across every age group. Isolation is bad at any age, basically, and I think we have a very highly engaged community relative to others that I could think of. One of the measures of that I point to often is we have far more community groups than other municipalities our size that I know of. Like 16 residents associations. I know municipalities that don't have any, and I see that kind of engagement as one of the strengths of our community. There seems to me there's a lot of wisdom in older people, and if we can get them or keep them engaged, we benefit as a community from that. Mark, how does the Change Rangers plan to deal with this?
In what way?
Well, what's your work around the Longevity Society going to look like?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First of all, one of my main, I guess you could say, positioning points is entrepreneurship in later life. So more and more people, as I said earlier, who are in that sort of mid-50s and early 60s are looking at ways to keep working but doing it differently.
So starting a business?
Starting a business, or it could be a blend of different things. I've created a couple of models around a portfolio approach that includes active participation that doesn't involve getting paid for it, but it blends with your work activities. So for me, it's a model around what I call portfolio life. And the more you can put those components in there, whether it's work or not, and we have to redefine what work even means, you know. So it could be mentally engaged with intergenerational activities, so that's work, as much as doing a consulting business may be work, or running a fish and chip shop in Oakville. It doesn't matter. It's all about that social engagement piece. And I think we have to take the nastiness out of this word work and still say that, you know, we can still contribute in the community.
Well, something happened of a tectonic level in society, because we've largely done away with the retirement age, and I mean, it might exist still somewhere, but
well, the mandatory retirement age of 65, we were talking about this earlier, it was abolished in Ontario some years ago, but we still peg things at different, depending on what research study you're doing or whatever. We keep moving what I call the line of scrimmage on what older is, you know. So in some reports it's 65, and others it's 60 and 50, and so where does older begin? I mean, active aging is a lifelong process, really.
Well, and the amount that, how old you look or feel, it seems to me has always been very variable. Like my grandfather lived to be 100, and he was spry and vital and lively right up to the end. My dad is on track to copy that. I keep telling him, would you aim higher?
You want to be part of that too, right?
I'd like an upward curve on everything, I think. So, Jodi, what are the 2 or 3 best things that we could do as a community to be age-friendly, or to be more age-friendly?
So I'll start, but please jump in. But I would say to continue the work that's being done to make places more accessible. So working on making sure sidewalks are safe and the cycle paths are safe, and there's accessibility to parks and trails. So continuing that work, I would say, really maybe more. What we could be doing better at is more outreach to people who may be isolated. There is an incredibly engaged community in the town of Oakville, you're right. We saw that with the number of people that completed our survey and came out to our workshops, but there are people that we're missing that may be living alone, may not be already connected to services. So maybe working with partners or doing some more outreach to get those individuals engaged and feel included and participating in the community. And I would also say just to continue to make people aware of the different programs and services, perhaps more the informal services, things like meal programs, volunteer driving, you know, some of the things that maybe aren't as visible in the community. Mental health supports too. I know in our survey it was something like, you know, almost 60% of the people that responded to our survey were not aware of any mental health services within the town. So not only having an awareness about the physical programs and the cultural activities, but also those social and mental health supports.
It is remarkable how invisible some of our offerings and our programs and supports are. And I guess it's out of sight, or you know, if you don't need it, you don't make yourself aware of it, and then when you suddenly need it, you didn't know.
Yeah.
And then we don't have a lot of mass media in our community.
Yeah, because there's a lot out there. I would say, you know, when we do our inventory of what's out there, there does seem to be a lot out there. But when you talk to people, not everybody's aware. Even things like in-home supports and how to access those supports that could come into your home, people aren't aware that that's available, and that's so important.
People, you know, the municipal act says that the mayor is the chief executive officer of the corporation of the town, but I find that I'm the chief helping officer. People phone me and go, where do I get such, why isn't there such and so? And I go, oh, well, let us connect you.
And I think understanding how people are accessing information, you know, where are people going to get and if we understand where people are going to get the information, maybe we can do a better job of getting it out there.
You know, I still meet people who don't know about 311. Like if you don't know where stuff is, call 311 and they'll connect you. So that is an ongoing issue. We're working on a Halton-wide basis and we've been doing this for almost 2 years, and the work is going to finish next month in November on a community safety and well-being plan. And one of the first things we did as we began that work was to take an inventory of all the supports for well-being and safety that we have in our community. And on November 27th, we're having a big conference to kind of finalize that plan. The needs of active aging and being age-friendly, I hope will be reflected well in that, but as well as everybody else's needs. And our goal is to coordinate and make comprehensive our approach. We've got dozens and dozens of helping agencies, and they often can be more effective if they link up and know about each other. So one of the byproducts of just asking everybody in to help create this plan is, oh, I didn't know about you. And so hopefully we'll make the community stronger. Kate, what's your advice for making Oakville or Halton more age-friendly? Or actually, from your perspective, you probably, I mean, any community.
Well, and I think that's
You're probably not allowed to just say Oakville.
Well, you know, my heart of my research is here in Oakville. But I think the important thing to talk about when we're thinking about active aging or an age-friendly environment is a piece of what Jodi had brought up. It's about accessibility. I think if we frame it, I know, Mark, you're very, you know, your pieces use, what language do we use? What words are we using? We don't need to frame it as an age-friendly community, but an everyone-friendly community. So making sure that curb cuts are appropriately sized, that can help people of all ages using mobility devices. It can use a parent pushing a child in a stroller. It can have a young child, you know, using one of those push scooters, making sure that there's safe walking trails down at the lakeshore that have benches where a nursing mother could stop, a family could stop to rest together, or an older individual could stop to take some medication, for example. All of the ideas, I think, that make a community more age-friendly just make it more livable and accessible for everyone. You know, there's a lot of talk now about this idea of universal design. So if we make hallways in our homes wider to ensure that people can age in place when maybe they need to use a scooter or they need to use a walker, well, that can be helpful for someone carrying a child on a hip, or if there's, you know, kids who want to be playing in the house and it gets a little bit too rambunctious. So an age-friendly community, I would say, we want to think of it from all of, you know, the accessibility, making sure communication is very clear about where the services are and how to access them. That will help our older individuals for sure, but it can only benefit benefit all of us, really.
Absolutely.
And that's why I use the phrase age inclusive on my website as opposed to age friendly, because friendly, it sounds like you're tinkering with something.
Or that we're not being friendly already, which we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Well, you know, Jodi pointed out that this was this whole age. The use of the word age is a riff that we're acquiring from an international agency rather than something that's generated from the grassroots here. But what you said about being friendly for all, you actually mentioned my magic word, livable.
Yeah.
And that is in fact why, I mean, it was kind of a process to get everybody to agree that the name of our vision would be Livable Oakville, but the idea was to make it as inclusive as it possibly could be. And instead of saying, oh, let's do something for this sector, let's do something for everybody. That one of the objections to calling the vision Livable Oakville was, but everything will fit in that. And I said, that's the point.
Exactly.
That's the beauty of the language that we use, right? Is it's not just livable for one sector or one group. It's why don't we try and see, Mark had mentioned this idea of intergenerational. We know from the research, when you have older and younger individuals working together, you're breaking down stereotypes, not only from an older perspective of what can young people do or what can young people be involved in, but for younger individuals going forward, you're breaking down those ageist stereotypes about what does it mean to be older and what does it mean to be, 60 plus or 65 plus. So if we make our communities more livable, we're just giving more opportunities for people from different generations to interact and to see, oh, well, I was out for a walk today and I saw an older individual with her mobility aid and I stopped to help her. It just helps to make our communities more inclusive and more friendly. So maybe it's livable and friendly versus just age friendly.
Yeah. Well, when I was young and my kids were daycare bound, my wife and I were members in a co-op daycare, and everybody has to work, right? And we were told, somebody told us that it was good for aging people to see younger people, that it lifted their spirits and helped their health and their attitude. And anyway, long story short, our co-op daycare was a project of a local church. One thing led to another, and we created a retirement home. So we had a church, a daycare, a pretty impressive daycare, and a pretty impressive seniors residence, retirement home, and we programmed it so that the seniors could interact with the kids, and it was designed so that they could also get some separation when the sound of young voices no longer pleased. So I saw firsthand the benefit of that inclusiveness that you just mentioned, and you triggered that memory.
Well, it sounds like your community then was light years ahead of what we're doing here in Canada. In Europe, there are many, many instances now where there are, daycares in retirement homes or older individuals coming to a school and helping out or volunteering. But it's not as commonplace, I think, as it could be here in Canada. And I think there's so much benefit for all age groups to really have that intergenerational connection and communication. So, here in Oakville, we could say maybe we did it first.
Yeah. I like very much the idea of the vocabulary being important, what we call things being important. And that's partly because I don't want to change the name of the vision from Livable Oakville to Aging Oakville. I'd rather be all-inclusive, so that's good. What else should we do besides accessibility?
So I mentioned just getting more information out there to people on the services. I think continuing to make sure that our housing and our transportation allow people to age in place, or they're able to get to the programs and services that are available. They're able to connect with their community from a housing perspective so that they can stay and that there's appropriate housing for them, affordable housing. I also think continue to engage. So you mentioned the town of Oakville, very engaged community, and I would definitely agree with that. So continuing to ask people, firsthand, what are the needs, what are the preferences of people, so of our older adults and our seniors, but in general our residents. I think we learned a lot from the age-friendly baseline study through talking to residents. We had, I think, over 500 residents help with that research by completing a survey, and we got lots of information just from talking to people firsthand about what they see, the needs and preferences as they age in Oakville and want to.
So it's gratifying on one level that it sounds like the biggest issue was this idea of accessibility, and as you know, there's this legal framework that's driving accessibility, so that nobody gets to take a holiday on accessibility. We're going to become more accessible whether people want to or not. The demand for the private sector to follow the public sector is very huge. I get calls all the time from people wanting to know how come this or that business isn't accessible as the town facilities are, and I have to explain, well, the law, the timetable for the law for them hasn't hit yet, and well, they ought to go early, and I wouldn't disagree with that. I have a friend from college who his whole life has always related to, and like me, he's now an elder himself, but as a young man, he was convinced that there was wisdom in old people, and he always used to seek older people out and ask them to tell their stories. And I've often wondered if we couldn't get older people more usefully and constructively engaged by just collecting their stories and sharing them in some way. The most important thing I ever learned in all of life was Peel's concept that Sir Robert Peel, one of the best prime ministers of the British Commonwealth, in my opinion, taught that we can have as livable a community as we're willing to work together to create, and without that work together to create, he actually called that a duty that's incumbent upon every member of society, that a duty to work together to create a better community. Without that, I think you get, well, if we look south, you can see what you get if you don't have that, I think. But I thank you for this conversation. I think this is a very important conversation, and not just across the elder end of the age spectrum, as you so well pointed out. This is really a larger topic. I'm very gratified by the way external sources like magazines and others have identified Oakville as one of the most livable places in the country. The joke I tell is the city of Burlington always ranks a little bit higher than us on livability, and our goal is to be the most livable town, and we're the city that calls herself a town and acts like a village, so we hit town. Thank you for being with us, and I hope to see you next time on Oakville Matters.